Hello everybody, good morning to you all. This is Baranuddin, roll number SM019 211, registration number 2015518422. I would like to talk about the history of the Fortran language. Here I go. Fortran was the world's first high-level programming language. The first Fortran compiler was a milestone in the history of the computing. At that time, computers had very small memories on the order of 15 KB. It was common then of the count memory capacities in bits. They were slow and had very primitive operating system, if they had them at all. At those days, it seemed that the only practical way to program in the assembly language. The pioneers of the Fortran did not invent the idea of the writing programs in a high-level language HLL and complying the source order of the object code with the optimizing compiler, but they produced the first successful HLL that designed the hill that is still the widely used, and an optimizing compiler that produced very efficient code. In fact, that Fortran compiler held the record for the optimizing code for 20 years. This wonderful first Fortran compiler was designed and written from the scratch in 1954 to 57 by the IBM team led by the John Warner Beckes and the staff with the super programmers like the Sheldon Best and the Haldon Herrick, Peter Sheridan, Roy Nart, Robert Nelson, Irving Giller, Richard Goldberg, Louis Hebert, and the David Sherry. By the way, the Beckes was also the system co-designer of the computer that ran the first compiler, the IBM 704. The new invention caught the quickly, no wonder programs computing the nuclear power reactor parameters took now hours instead of the weeks to write, and they required much less programming skill. Another great advantage of the new invention was that the programming now became the portable. Fortran won the battle against the assembly language, the first and the series of the battles to come, and the way adapted the scientific military communities and used to the extensively in the space program and the military project. The phenomenal success of the Fortran first team can be attributed in the part of the friendly, non-authoritative group climbed. Another factor may be that the IBM management had the sense to the shelter and protect the group, even though the project took much more time than was first anticipated. Fortran's second, 1951, was a significant improvement. It added the capability for the separate compilation program models, assembly language models, and could also the linked loaded with the Fortran models. Fortran third, 1950, was never released to the public. It made possible using the assembly language code right in the middle of the Fortran code of an HLL lost. Fortran 4th, 1961, was the cleanup of the Fortran 2nd, improving things like the implementation of the common and the equivalence statement and the eliminating some of the machine-dependent language of the irregularities. Fortran 2nd to Fortran 4th translator was used to the written backward compatibility with the earlier Fortran programs. On the way, 1962, another milestone was the Traverse, and the ASA community started developing of the standard for the Fortran language, a very important step that made it worthwhile for the patrons of the procedure Fortran system for every new computer, and made Fortran an even more popular HLL. The new ASA standard was published in 1966. It was known accordingly as the Fortran 66. It was the first HLL standard in the world. Fortran 77 standard. Formerly outdated many years ago, compilers for Fortran 77 are still used today, mainly to the compiler legacy code. Fortran 77 added do loops with the decreasing the control variable index, block if, statement if, then s end if. Before Fortran 77 there were only the if go to statement. Pretest of the do loops. Before F77, do loops were always executed at the least once, so you had to add an if go to before the loop if you wanted the expected the behavior. Character data type. Before F77, character were always stored inside the integer variable. Address stop limited character string the content constant. Main program the termination without the stop statement. The next Fortran standard after Fortran 77 was out, allowing other programming language to involve and the complete with the Fortran. For example, the system programming language C and its evolved the variant C++ become more popular in the traditional strongholds Fortran, the scientific and the engineering worlds, in the spirit of the being non-computationally oriented. The delay in the publishing the new standard can be attributed in the part of political reason, testified by the Brian Meek in Fortran Saga. Fortran 90 standard. A new standard has been designed and widely implemented in the recent year. It is the unofficially called Fortran 90 and adds many powerful extensions in Fortran 77. The language in its present from competitive with the computer language created later. Fortran 90 added free format source code from column independence, modern control structure, case and do while, recurse structure called the derived data types, powerful array notation, the intent controller, modulus, package and constant variable and code. Fortran 95 standard. Fortran 95 added some minor improvement to the Fortran 90 standard. Fortran from a user point of view. Yes, it was a Fortran on the IBM 7094 have written the volumes of the Fortran code and have the separate through. It ought to be the written the assembly language. It ought to be the written in PL by 1. It ought to be written in C, etc. Depending the on what generation of the programmer was the doing the criticizing. Few years ago in the CBOL at the one of the users resort to the replying to questionnaire by the showing them some function the link and the asking was doing the asking you tell me what language was them written in. It was a good see someone else the organizer of the language obvious matter. The Fortran 95 standard includes in the optional part 3 which defines an optional conditional compilation capability. This capability is often referred to as COCO. Many Fortran compilers have the integrated subset of the C preprocessor into their system. Sims script is an application the specific Fortran preprocessor for the modeling and the simulating the large discrete system. The A programming language was designed to be the clean subset of Fortran 95 that attempt to remove the reduction, the unstructured and the depreciated feature of the Fortran, such as the equivalence statement. F retains the array feature added in Fortran 90 and removes the control statement that were made the absolute by structure the programming construct added to the both Fortran 77 and Fortran 90. F is described by its creators. Last of all, I would like to thank my honorable teacher, for listening my presentation. That's all.